Hello everyone and welcome back to another Borderlands 3 video. My name is Nootmad and today I'll be taking you guys through my Bloodletter Amp build, which is a build that I've been working on for quite some time. This build revolves around a couple concepts, but primarily it revolves around abusing amp mechanics through the Bloodletter Class Mod. Typically, the Bloodletter Class Mod has been combined with the Deathless Relic to achieve large shields and what can only be described as a mediocre damage boost through desperate measures exclusively. However, with this setup that I'm using right now, I'm combining the class mod with the Victory Rush Relic and an altered skill tree, as well as a specific kind of shield, to fully focus on amp abuse to sustain incredibly high damage for mobbing and bossing alike. Now, I am pretty biased towards this, however, in my opinion, this is by far, and I think, the most effective use for a Bloodletter Class Mod, and I'm going to break down how this build works and why it's so effective, as well as what sort of gear you're going to need for it. So, let's just get straight into the weapons, right? So, the first weapon I recommend is the Plaguebearer Rocket Launcher, which is a Mayhem 6 plus drop from the Warden boss, which is in the anvil, and forms a primary source of damage for this build. When amped, this launcher can do a ton of damage to mobs in a very large area, making it perfect for areas like the Crystal Charging Plates in Guardian Takedown, or, the bridge in Maliwan Takedown as well. Both are areas where there's a very high mob density, and that's exactly the side of area where the Plaguebearer excels in. So, elements for the Plaguebearer that I recommend really depends on the enemies that you are fighting, but I recommend getting a Radiation variant just for general mobbing and bossing, and throughout campaign playthroughs or just general plays, you can easily get away with just a Radiation Plaguebearer. However, in areas like the Guardian Takedown, where enemies are far more tanky than usual, I highly recommend getting a Shock variant of the Plaguebearer, as well as an Incense variant. The Shock one will be used for killing the Guardians, the Incense version will be used for killing the Necrodefair bugs. So, that's the elements out of the way, and as for the anoint I recommend the consecutive hits anoint. Now, why do I say this as opposed to something like the splash anoint? Because you've got to be using this gun exclusively, more or less, unless you're fighting bosses. Getting in and out of Iron Bear just to keep the splash anoint up does get a bit tedious, and especially in areas where you can get swarmed very easily. Getting in and out of Iron Bear can sometimes cause an instant down for you because all the mobs will suddenly converge on you in that. So I'm trying to minimize the amount of time spent in Iron Bear, and so that's why I decided to use the consecutive hits anoint. Now, the consecutive hits anoint isn't all bad, and like I mentioned in my previous build videos as well, the consecutive hits anoints can be maintained with grenade damage, with Skagdan, and just general damage over time, because you are using elemental weapons, and they will be doing damage over time. They will all count to serve to maintain that anoint, and in most situations, you'll be maintaining the damage bonus quite nicely. So, that covers the primary weapon for this build, but there's also another weapon that I'd recommend using, and that is the Backburner. The Backburner, much like the Plaguebearer, is also a Mayhem 6 drop, but drops from the Agonizer 9000 from Carnivora. And this weapon specifically will be the one you'll be using to fight bosses. Now, the primary element I would recommend is Corrosive, but it's also good to have a Shock and Incense variant. But if you could only pick one element, I would suggest the Corrosive variant of the Backburner for the sole reason that the raid bosses in this, which are Wotan and Scourge, are both heavily armored, as well as the mini bosses being Valkyrie and Anathema. All have very high levels of armor, and so having a Corrosive Backburner is very useful to one-shot each of those phases and really get those fast kills on them without, any downtime. So yeah, but as for the anoint, now, as opposed to the Plaguebearer, I might recommend a Splash Anoint or a Consecutive Hits Anoint on the on Backburner, sorry. It's really up to you, but Consecutive Hits is more reliably and easily accessed. Splash damage does do more damage if you have that as an anoint on your Backburner, but it's truly up to you whether or not you decide to get in and out of Iron Bear excessively. So that's the weapons. However, I just want to point out that the EMP5 is also a solid weapon to have just sitting in your 4th slot, especially if you're doing the Guardian Takedown raid. Moze does lack a lot of mobility bonuses that the other characters like Zane, Fleck, and Amara have. So being able to have the EMP5 with that little speed boost that it gives you is very nice to have, especially when you're doing the platforming jumps. So yeah, it's just a quality of life weapon if anything. You don't need it for this build, but if you are using this build for the raid, I recommend grabbing your hands on that. So yeah, that's basically the weapons out of the way. Now, as for the grenade, it's just a cloning maddening tracker. There's really nothing too special about this. Basically the bread and butter grenade for any Moze build. Yeah, nothing much else to say about that. Plays very nicely with Vampire. It can crit because we have Build a Holy Pin, which means we can proc redistribution. Procking redistribution means we can get ammo regen and health regen. So yeah, it's just a very useful utility grenade to have. The relic we'll be using is the Atom Bomb Victory Rush. Now, typically you would see most Bloodletter builds using a Deathless. However, I do not for this combination specifically because I have more points in Thin Red Line, which is letting me get to that 1 HP threshold. So I'm able to use a Victory Rush relic instead. The benefit of being able to have an Atom Bomb Victory Rush over an Atom Bomb Deathless, for example, is that Victory Rush gives us an actual damage bonus, whereas all Deathless does is just give us bigger shields. The trade-off really is quite drastic, especially when you consider the fact that enemies are very tanky in Mayhem 10 and even more tanky in endgame content like the Guardian Takedown. So you want to really be able to squeeze out as much damage as possible out of a build, and that's something a Deathless relic cannot do for you. However, the Victory Rush relic gives you extra damage and movement speed when you kill a badass enemy, and as far as you guys know, and I'm sure you would have noticed while playing the raids and that, there are a lot of badass enemies, which means you'll always be getting that damage boost and movement speed bonus as well. And the Atom Bomb prefix also lets us do more damage with our radiation auras. Now, it's not necessary to have the Atom Bomb. I just like it because I like to see enemies explode with yellow glee. But, of course, you can realistically use a Snowdrift Victory Rush, Last Stand Victory Rush. It's really up to you. But at the end of the day, the Victory Rush is the most important part, and the prefix can just be whatever suits your build best. So, that's the grenade and the relic out of the way. And now it's probably time to discuss the 2 stars of this build. And that is the Bloodletter Class Mod and the shield. Now, for the shield, I recommend getting an enhanced version 0.m shield. This is a legendary amp shield that drops from the Valkyries in the Maliwan Takedown raid, and it is an amp shield that gives us a very significant amp bonus when the shield is fully charged. And that's basically how this build works. What the Bloodletter Class Mod does is turns all health regen into shield regen. So when we have things like Vampire running, when we have Russian Offensive, or when we have redistribution, you'll always be maintaining your shields at high capacity or almost always full, which basically means every shot we make with our Plague Bearer or our Backbone is going to be amped, being able to deal a ridiculous amount of damage. And as you can see in the gameplay in the background, the damage that I'm doing is crazy, and if you pay attention to the number of phalanx stacks I have, most times I'm maintaining at least 20 to 30 stacks, which is just incredible for shield capacity and gun damage as well. So yeah. However, if you don't have the 0.m shield from the raid, you can always use a rerouted shield or a one-shotter shield. The rerouter can be obtained as a world drop, but also a specific farm as well. And the one-shotter shield you can get from vendor farming. So if you are sort of lacking the shield or the gear to do the Maliwan Takedown to farm this version 0.m shield, rerouter does the job well enough until you can get this. However, the end game of this build, I would recommend just getting a 0.m shield. So yeah, that's a shield. Once I just want to point out that the anoint doesn't really matter. Just use whatever anoint you want really, because we're not really getting it into Iron Bear. However, if you do plan on doing that, get an anoint that will work well with the enemies you're fighting against. So get action skill and radiation, corrosive, cryo. It's all just dependent on the enemies that you're fighting. So yeah, that's the shield. Now, as for the class mod, we are using the Bloodletter Class Mod with 3 in Desperate Measures and 2 in Thin Red Line. Now, I decided to get more points into Thin Red Line instead of Phalanx, which most Bloodletter Class Mods typically would have, because once again, I wanted to get to that 1 HP threshold to make the best use out of Desperate Measures, but also because I wanted to free up my relic slot to use something that can actually give me solid bonuses. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but once again, I don't like using Deathless relics because it sort of limits your ability to have a flexible and high damage build. Being able to do 5 out of 3 Thin Red Line, which puts us to 1 HP, and then being able to use a relic like the Pearl or the Atom Bomb Victory Rush, Snowdrift Victory Rush, or whatever other relic you so choose. At the end of the day, it does give you that flexibility, which is very nice for a build. The rolls that I would suggest to get on your Bloodletter would be Weapon Charge Speed, Heavy Weapon Damage, and Splash Damage. And yeah, just because it suits the build, we're using Torg weapons, we're using heavy weapons, and so yeah, basically just get whatever rolls like I suggested that will boost the damage off your guns. So that is the gear out of the way. Now we will move on to the skill trees. So let's start off with the Shield of Retribution skill tree. Nothing too special here. You may notice that I have 4 points in Selfless Vengeance currently. You can put those 4 points into Armored Infantry. It's really up to you. I just like to have that on-demand elemental bonus just by pressing R. Armored Infantry does give you a very stagnant damage boost, which is fine and honestly personal preference. But yeah, I just put mine in Selfless Vengeance. I got 1 in Security Bear just on the off chance that things do get hectic and you do need to jump into Iron Bear for survivability. Security Bear does help with that as well. So that's why I picked it up. We have 5 points of Drowning of Brass. Well, nothing much else to say. Drowning of Brass is a skill that enables Moze to do a ton of damage, so that's why I just maxed it out. No question to ask about that. We have 5 out of 3 in Thin Red Line, which gets us to the 1 HP unless it's used, 6 out of 3 effective Desperate Measures. We have 3 in Flat of Ingenuity. No solid reason to pick that other than to just go further down in the tree. But it does give us a nice little shock resistance bonus, which is nice if we're fighting enemies that have shock weapons, so our shields do stay up a little bit longer. But yeah, there's really no tactical reason to pick that. It's just mostly because we just want to be able to push ourselves further down the tree. And we have Experimental Munitions. This skill is just a very nice skill to have, especially when we're critting. Now I know we are using heavy weapons which aren't reliably critable, but yeah, whenever you do crit, you do extra damage, which is always nice to have. We have 6 points in Desperate Measures, 3 from Investment and 3 from our class mod. And at 1 HP, we get 100% gun damage. It's a pretty nice damage boost to have, and yeah, we're at 1 HP, so it just makes sense to use that. And we have 5 points in Phalanx. Now, Phalanx is easily one of Moze's best skills, gives her gun damage, and gives her extra shields. There's really no reason to not max this out for any red tree based build. And it's this skill that enables this build to be as flexible as possible. When you do get to very high shield capacities, sometimes Vampire does struggle to maintain that, but because of the amount of Phalanx stacks we'd get and the amount of gun damage we'd be getting, it makes up for it in a sense. So there is a sort of sweet spot in that regard. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you do have 20 to 30 Phalanx stacks, your shield's got to be kicking over the 200,000 mark. And Vampire might not be able to sustain it as effectively, but there's no need to worry if your shield isn't full and getting those amp shots, because you'll be getting so much gun damage from Phalanx itself. So yeah, that's Red Tree. Now we'll just move on to Green Tree. Once again, this is basically just filler points. The initial 5 points of Cloud of Lead were just put in to get redistribution, and I had 1 point left over, which I just decided to dump into Stoke. Realistically, you can put that single point into any way you want. Personally, I just leave it in there. However, you can put an extra point of Selfless Vengeance. You can put it in full Cannibal Blast. You can put it in Force Feedback. It's really up to you where you put those points. It's a single point, so just put it wherever you want it to go. And yeah, that's Bottomless Mags. Now we'll move on to Demolition Woman. We have a single point in Fire and Skagden and 4 in Grizzled. Now, I'm sure you would have seen on YouTube, and I also briefly mentioned it in the comments of one of my videos. Fire and Skagden is a bit weird right now, in the fact that it's scaling well beyond what it's supposed to. I don't want to create a build that focuses on what is basically a broken mechanic right now, because the second they nerf that or fix it, which I feel like they would, and they meaning Gearbox, when they do fix that, the damage for the build will go down exponentially, and so I don't want to create a build that relies on that. There are currently a lot of builds on YouTube that do that, basically just max out as many points as Skagden. And yeah, in my opinion, that's not totally ideal, because once they nerf that, the damage of the weapons that they're using will be going down. So I just have a single point in here, just to maintain our consecutive hits rate, and ultimately there's really nowhere else to put those points, so that's why I just put them in Grizzled. But yeah, having Grizzled does help to get Iron Bear back faster if you choose to use it, so yeah, it's just a good utility skill to have. We have 3 points in Means of Destruction, which gives us ammo regen. We are chucking nades a lot, we are doing a ton of splash damage, which helps us maintain our rocket ammo, which is great because then we can keep dealing damage. We have Tor Cross Promotion, doubles our splash radius with a chance to, increases our splash damage with a chance to double our splash radius. Just a very nice skill to have, especially with launchers, because then we're able to do a ton of damage. 4 in Stainless Steel Bear, no real reason. Stainless Steel Bear no longer buffs short fuse, so that's not the reason I picked it. Once again, it was just picked just to push myself further down the tree. We have 1 point in Auto Bear. Now, once again, this build was designed with just Moze in mind and not so much Auto Bear. But it is nice to have Auto Bear to target soften or just to aggro draw. So that's why it's there. We have a single point in Pull the Holy Pin. Now, typically, you would see Pull the Holy Pin have 3 out of 3 points. But in this build, there's really no need to max that out because we're not using a Mine Super Class mod, for example. The single point is enough to make a grenades crit and proc redistribution. So yeah, that's why we just have a single point in there. We have 5 points in Vampire. Now, typically, I wouldn't normally put so many points in, but because we really want that health regen to make sure our shield stays topped off, that's why I put 5 points into there. We have a single point into the last. Very useful utility skill because it helps us keep up 2 Angry to Die, which is the Guardian rank perk that increases our fight for your lifetime when doing damage. So yeah, just a very useful utility skill. It's a single point, and there's no reason not to pick that. And we finally have Short Fuse, which is Moze's capstone skill. Basically lets us do a ton more splash damage, and now with the way it scales and the way it deals its damage, it's an incredibly powerful skill. And yeah, just what enables a lot of those one shots you see on the trash mobs, and just those big damage numbers that you might see on bosses. But yeah, that's it for the build. If you guys have any questions around that or any suggestions for things that you want to see changed in this build, or just to discuss it, just let me know in the comments below. But aside from that, that's been my Bloodletter amp build. I hope you guys enjoyed the build and learned something from it. I hope you guys have a fun playing through this build. And yeah, that's about it for the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya!